also one of the concerns too was when looking at the data, there was a certain site, I believe it was site 1, that was located on the most south side, that even though the levels were within the criteria, they were showing more elevations than the other sites we're seeing. So we're having the mobile methane platform kind of go through that area just to provide a double check to the other areas to make sure that, are we seeing anything coming from that side? And with regards to the on-site portion, is the on-site portion giving some evidence that is being seen in the community? So when asked what our current measurement suite is, this is it. In terms of, we are now at 2 sites as in accordance to phase 3. We have the trailer that's out there in the PRNC Community School. It still has continuous methane. That is backed up with, if it does see elevated concentrations of methane in a short time frame, again, this is a minute time scale, it will trigger a collection of both a canister and 10-lar bag, which can look for both compounds that are considered toxic as well as the sulfur compounds. So just as a reminder, methane itself is not considered toxic. It's the other compounds I think everybody else is worried about, namely the mercaptans. So that's why we're set up to look for, in any case of elevated methane, to look for some of the other gases. Also the other location, we're still at the community center, but there we have actually added up a few more measurements. We've added particulate matter because we want to see if there's any correlations to some of those spikes to particulate matter, which would be indicative of combustion. And then also we're working with others to put in additional measurements. We are adding the continuous benzene monitor there. ARB was running that at one of their other sites. We've inherited that system and we're installing it there as well. So as far as kind of that shifting resources I mentioned earlier, so what we're doing is we're looking at other steps for air monitoring. Number one, we're still continuing that phased approach. Again, the data is showing that there is a lot of typical ambient air levels of the gases that we're looking at. However, we are concerned about reinjection. It is not kind of to say that, okay, we have this smaller network and we're not going to be cognizant or concerned about any activity that could potentially create a bigger release or higher levels of these gases into the community. So again, as you notice in the order, we are going to be notified if reinjection is going to occur. So we will be coming back out in force during that time of reinjection. So depending on how the reinjection plan comes out, we'll have kind of an adaptable strategy. But yeah, we'll be here on site. We'll probably increase our mobile methane platform again to kind of do the surveys. And then if it's ongoing, then we'll deploy more fixed sites as needed. But again, I just want to reassure you that we are planning on being out here when reinjection intends on occurring. And then we're still doing on-site surveys to see if there's anything that is ongoing in between that time. Other things that we're doing, we're exploring other technologies and platforms that may be appropriate to use in the case of reinjection or maybe even on an ongoing basis. So we've been working with JPL, we've been working with some other third-party companies that have some like remote sensing devices or other types of monitors that may be appropriate. So and other platforms too. So we're looking at remote sensing devices, we're looking at aerial platforms. So we're kind of seeing what we have as a toolbox in case another event were to occur, or to preemptively do some surveys to determine if there are some areas that need attention on the facility. We're also providing input on the CARB, and of course we're also looking at making some rulemaking efforts with regards to natural gas facilities. Part of that will include, again, maybe more enhanced leak detection portion, some monitoring, so it will be consistent with what is going on with some of our sister agencies. And then interim, before those rules come into place, we've been working with the LA Department of Public Health the California Air Resources Board, and UCLA to kind of determine what to do at interim. And there are some concerns of like the ongoing operations even after reinjection occurs. So what kind of things can we think of in the interim between when basically now or when we're projected to go off of our order of abatement monitoring and when the new rules come into place. So we're trying to fill in the gap and work out a plan to fill in the gap so that way the community is covered in that time. So I'll conclude kind of, as I mentioned, the next public hearing, as mentioned, is this Saturday, 9 o'clock, and it's at the Woodland Hills, and the address is here. And at this time, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Maybe we just go down the table. If you have any questions, then we ask them.
You mentioned re-injection plan several times in your talk. Is there a plan? Is there a plan?
I'm not aware of, I think a few weeks ago, there was a hearing with the CPUC in terms of if SoCalGas can reject or not. I believe parts of that, again, CPUC has to approve. A lot of that's going to be based on some of the daughter tests that are still being conducted. So right now, it's kind of a rolling, process that we're keeping track of. So that way, if they're given the approval, then we have to be out there and ready on our side.
I'm sorry, Miss David.
Oh, David.
David, you have a question that you'd like to ask?
How much notice from the time the re-injection, if it's approved, until the public is aware so that we go, let's say I want to know if my dog doesn't like the smell of gas or something, that I could maybe, change dogs or do something else, so that I want a warning. How much warning would you give the public? Oh, next Monday we're going to inject fuel, or is it going to be like 30 days? What do you think?
Well, I can only speak to what's in the order of abatement. The order of abatement said 24 hours. I believe in our order of abatement.
Can I interject? It is not AQMD's final decision, it is Dodger's final decision.
Oh, okay.
And my understanding is that in the regulation that was approved,
Right.
Dodger is required to have a public meeting about the injection before it happens. I don't know the specifics, but that's my understanding.
Awesome.
And I've requested clarification from Dodger on exactly how that timeline is going to work. Unfortunately, I've not yet gotten an answer.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
And I do believe Dogger has to give 15 days notice of that hearing to the public. So there's a process.
Oh, very good. So we can get a new dog.
Again, to confirm that. Sherry, any other questions?
No.
That time, I'm sorry. Susan?
Yeah, during the August 6th AQMD hearing at CSUN, you had mentioned that up at the Highlands and PRNC Park, that there was a spike in methane and it triggered the sample of a volatile organic compound. You took the sample, there were elevated levels of benzene, etc. And then I asked you where they were from. And you said you didn't know, but the poolman was there. So I have some follow-up questions.
Sure.
When you have an elevated number like that, do you track it down? Because it's not natural.
So,
And did you track that one down?
So we have been actually noticing a pattern. I actually want to outreach to the community today because we have noticed a specific pattern that we've seen in the last 4 weeks now too. So on Friday mornings between 5:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m., we see essentially 3 minutes of elevated concentrations on our continuous monitor, and which triggers the collection of our samples. So it's not a long event, it's basically 3 minutes that we've seen. And it's between the hours, it's on Fridays, between 5:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. So this is where we can work together maybe to help with parts of that. And if we see it consistently, I'm going to see if I can try to get somebody out here. But it would help, if you happen to see activity at that community center at Highlands between 5:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. Because for the past 4 weeks, we have seen that. Fortunately, though, when we did trigger the collection, the levels of the components that I talked about earlier were much lower than than that one particular sound.
Okay, and
So if that helps.
okay, so that's only permitted at the Highlands, it's not.
It's only at the Highlands, yeah, and it's only like a
Okay, so
3-minute
maybe we can
event.
work with our HOA and try to figure that out.
That'd be great, and we have actually outreached to the HOA to see if there's any scheduled activity between 5:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. on Fridays. We haven't gotten an answer back, but if you happen to know, we'd be happy to.
I'll follow up with our
Okay.
HOA, because that's my HOA.
Oh, okay, perfect, thank you.
So when you see these spikes, like the one at 2 in the morning, that goes up to 5, and I know on your website it says normal background is approximately 2 parts per million. Results greater than 3 parts per million suggest some additional sources of methane. So my question is, and you've been seeing these spikes, once on and again, and this is from Argo Scientific, and you can get it on your smartphone, we all know how to get this. So when you see those spikes, how do you track down where they're coming from? Because they're above background.
Right, so let me explain the 3. So the 3 is a long-term average, not a short-term average. So there's a question of time scales, because, and that's why when you notice in our criteria, we scaled it to time. So methane had 3 provisions: instantaneous at 5 ppm, it had hourly at 4 ppm, and then 24-hour average of 3 ppm. So we understand in terms of just in general, the atmosphere fluctuates. So in concentrations and levels and sources. So within a natural fluctuation, it can have a certain range. So when I say that methane concentrations will be like between 2 and 3, that's like an annual average. That's averaging a bunch of data points. But within those data points, there's a fluctuation. There's a standard deviation. So sometimes the concentrations will be higher, sometimes the concentrations should be lower. So that's why we have the different time scales. When you're looking at the Argo Scientific data, that's 5-minute averages. That's really a short time scale. So when it reaches 5 ppm for 5 minutes, then it's not the same as saying 5 ppm for a long period of time. It doesn't mean that there's not something there. I think when looking at facilities and looking at just, facilities in general, you have a source of methane there. It's an issue that we face with refineries as well in terms of, can they seal everything perfectly? The answer is probably not. So, to get everything airtight, there's a lot of things that unfortunately, they can't get perfectly sealed.
So what I'm hearing is the spikes are real. You're just saying.
There's fluctuation. The data says that there's fluctuations. There's right.
Right, so you're just saying you look at an average, but the spikes are coming from a facility that is closed and has not re-injected the gas yet. Is that correct?
The facility is closed, but there could be some pressure there. I'm not sure. Yeah. So if there's pressure,
See why we're concerned.
right. The facility is closed, but it's under pressure.
And there's
So
still
with
spikes.
pressure,
Even though they're short term, there's still spikes, right? Am I reading that right?
so there's short-term elevations. That's basically what I can say.
Okay. Okay, and then, so basically, okay, I'm not gonna ask you stuff, that's up there. Okay, so AQMD has moved to phase 3, is that the phase we're in right now?
Correct.
When do we move to phase 2, what exactly?
So the phases actually go in from 1, which was the initial graph that I showed, which had more monitors. So phase 1 is going back to this. There was a large leak.
Okay, so we're gonna go to phase 4 now?
Right. Phase 4 will be the final.
So when does phase 4, okay, so phase 4 is the final, and when will that be scheduled?
It was tentatively scheduled for later this month. However, given that there's potential for re-injection, I don't think we're going to be going to that phase until the point of we're comfortable with re-injection.
Okay, so you're not gonna do phase 4?
Right, and that's actually, so remember, there are some conditions just for us, just for our concern in terms of whether or not we're comfortable moving to the next phase. And with the idea that re-injection is coming, we're not comfortable going to phase 4.
Okay, so you're gonna,
So we're going to maintain at least phase 3.
and phase 3 is 2 monitors, is that right?
So currently we have the 2 stations.
Susan, can I ask you to look at the list that you have and focus on the one that you're confident you have not gotten a clear answer for, because
Right.
I'm already blowing the schedule.
Okay. Okay, that's it, thank you. yeah, I mean, I think he answered the other one, I just wanted some clarification. And I think he answered, yeah, because I was going to ask, are you pulling your hair monitor now before it's repressurized? No. So you're going to stay here through the repressurization. That's what the last 4 questions were.
Okay.
And, okay, and I would ask you to, I can't ask you to speculate after you pull the equipment out because we don't know that you're going to.
I'm sorry?
I can't ask you to speculate about how you're going to monitor the methane and volatile organic compounds after you pull your equipment out, because at this point you're not planning.
Right, we're not planning, because we're anticipating repressurization. It will depend on how the repressurization goes and how the data looks during the time of repressurization. I anticipate that we're going to wait until it reaches the maximum that they're allowed to have, stay there for a period of time, see how the data looks, and see how it goes from there.
Okay, and one more quick question. Yesterday at court, the $4 million plea agreement, or whatever it was called, they said they were only going to monitor it for 3 years. Why only 3 years? You know?
No, like I said,
That's not
unfortunately it's a criminal
fair.
case, we weren't privy to that information.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Okay, you said that you have a monitor at this school, Fort Ranch.
That's right.
Okay, what about Castle Bay?
So that was our original intent. I think when I talked to the hearing board last, our intent was to stay at the 2 schools. So we worked really hard with Castle Bay because the students were coming back. We also have to make sure that there's safety to be considered. So we worked with principals with the school to try to see if we can work out a site with the school to see if we can have a combination of consideration for the students, consideration for the school concerns, and also our siting requirements. Because if we put the monitor in a bad location where it doesn't see a lot of air, or it doesn't in the proper wind flow, then the monitor and the air that's seen is not really reflective of the community. So those parameters couldn't meet. So that's why we stayed at the Highlands Community Center rather than stay at Castle Bay. We did try looking at some other sites that were recommended by the communities. There's a couple preschools and parks that we looked at per some recommendation that we got on the hearing board, so thank you, Susan, for that. We did look into those, but unfortunately, again, the siting didn't quite work out. There was a lot of trees. There wasn't necessarily some power there. So we did actively look for getting a little bit more of a spread. Because one of the things that we looked at when looking at a monitoring strategy is to see how geographically we can be to get better coverage. But given the fact that we're working with flights, in fact we're working with JPL. There's already been a few flights over the facilities. So we're doing some additional measures. Even though the number of our stations that you can see has gone down to 2, we are still, like I mentioned, doing some other things, working with other agencies and doing some aerial profiles to check, not only so but also some other facilities.
I just want to make sure that the people who live east of Tampa are being monitored as carefully as they are west of Tampa, because it seems like a lot of the parks west of Tampa get a lot more attention than the other side, and there's a lot of people who are really affected.
So that's why we also sent the mobile monitoring down there as well, so that way at least we have some sort of, it's not 24-hour coverage, but at least it gives us a survey. And again, if there's something that we're concerned about, then we can look into adding more resources. But right now, we haven't really seen enough evidence to say that putting another station out there is going to give us more information.
Okay, the other thing is there a community oversight committee to oversee Dogger and AQMD? Because one of the basic problems with this entire situation is the lack of trust. That no one was asleep at the wheel because there was no wheel. And what we want to make sure is that this is monitored properly, that they do more than a sniff test. I mean, we live in a very scientific era. And I think that perhaps the neighborhood council might even want to consider putting our own stations in and monitoring them publicly rather than through the government. And that's just my statement, but is there a community oversight committee?
So what I can tell you is there was a federal review by the White House that was being conducted. A draft report's going to be
But
coming
they're
out.
not responding very quickly,
Well,
and they're acting very slow, and we don't have a lot of time. I mean, this is something that's happening right now. It's not something we can wait on the White House to decide how
Right,
serious.
well, I can't speak for the White House, but I do know that process is going on. They're in the process of a draft report. I can't tell you when the final report's coming out, but I do know that there is a federal interagency review that's been looking at, all the responses.
Okay. What agency is that?
It's a federal, it consists of US EPA, and it consists of a couple other agencies.
You know, we didn't get a lot of cooperation from our governor, and I find it kind of hard to think we're going to get much more cooperation from the president. He has a lot on his table. But that's a comment, you don't need to. The other thing I wanted to ask you is that I'm still getting oil spots on my property.
Yep, lots of people.
How long, why is that? How long will that continue? And can I call the AQMD and have them test the spots on my car? And the interesting part is, my car's parked in my driveway, which faces north, the driver's side, and that's where it's covered. And my balcony's covered, my lawn furniture covered, and especially I notice when it's overcast, it seems to be more prominent than when it's clear outside. I don't know if that has any effect on it, but can I call the AQMD to come and take a sample off of my car to see what that is?
I think I'm just trying to run through the different tests that we would have for that, because we would need probably a substantial amount of material for that. And when asked for doing, let's say, like the wipe tests that were conducted for the indoor, our experience with like wipe tests, which I think would probably be the best that we could do for your car, probably won't give us a whole lot of information unless you've got a lot of.
But I work in the medical field,
Yeah.
and they can scrape a piece of it off and send it to a lab and have it evaluated.
Right.
You guys, are you set up to do that?
We can do. It depends on the material. If it's a metal and if there's enough of it, we can see it. Right now, we're in the process of trying to get equipment that can look at more of the volatile components, but we don't have that equipment in-house.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question. 2 days ago, the gas company sent out an email saying that there was a gas leak. I looked on fence line, their fence line was down at the time, so I couldn't get actual results. But I did see many people reporting it all over the internet. Did your canisters open up that day?
They do not. I received notice of that. I checked the perimeter data right around our sites. I think it was like 4 o'clock. And I checked the sites, and then I asked our mobile methane monitor to get that out there as soon as possible. The reports that came out, and I already got the results in terms of like our facility, was not different than what we've seen in our past monitoring. We were there Friday, we were there Tuesday, and I checked the perimeter monitors from 4 o'clock on to just check to see if I could see even something little, like I showed you in the presentation, just even a little bump to see if there was something there. And I
The
could see
report
it.
came in around starting at 7, 8 a.m. in the morning. Were those numbers looked at too, or only 4 o'clock?
Well, I looked at the entire day, and I didn't see anything. I looked at 48 hours, but yeah, I try to look. Usually, what I do is I try to look at a reference baseline, which is the time period before, and all the levels were already fairly low already. Right.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, so staying on that same topic about the leak that just happened, and looking at the number 11 on the order of abatement, the air quality notification plan. Some people got an email alerting us from SoCalGas, and some people did not. And some people opted in, and some people did not. And it didn't matter. So can you guys please address that? This is a really big deal. I really do feel that it shouldn't be an opt-in, opt-out for alerts. It should be everybody within a 5-mile radius and anyone else who wants to know. That just gets an automatic email from SoCalGas. And like you said, maybe tying it to the fence line monitors so that everyone's alerted, so that we don't have to go scrambling around for information on Facebook or checking with our neighbors, because it just doesn't make any sense. Some people are like, well, I got it because I was relocated. Well, someone else says, well, I was relocated too, and I didn't get anything. It just doesn't make any sense. So can you guys take a look at that?
I'll take that back to parties that would have input on that, and see if instead of an opt-in, there could be an opt-out. I think that's what you're asking, correct?
Right, I just don't think, it shouldn't be opt-in or opt-out, it should just be.
Well, meaning that everybody's automatic, but you have the
Yeah.
option to opt out.
That's correct, even if it's pick the lead. I don't. And I think, you answered some questions about the health study being contested by SoCal Gas. Do you have any more information on that, what you guys are wanting to do, and where the gridlock is on that?
Well, I mean, for us, we're trying to consult that independent panel of experts to define that scope, and that's where the disagreement is occurring. Because, I mean, they've proposed like one type of health study, and we're wanting to consult an independent board of health experts to define that scope of how, an appropriate study of this type of event should occur, and that's where the disagreement will be at.
Alex?
I'm going to dovetail a moment back to the email. The email notifications are as vague as is humanly possible. We had a leak at some time and we fixed it. It doesn't say how bad, it doesn't say where in the site, where in the facility it occurred. It doesn't give the community any real information. On top of the fact that it was 5 hours after the supposed detection of the leak or possibly remediation of it, it's many hours before we're notified. So the community has no ability to decide to vacate the community during an active event. We're told way after the fact, and generally the community knows because we've already seen Facebook or anywhere else, and people are already reporting something. So getting more specifics in the reports and forcing SoCal Gas to more promptly notify the community would be a very strong request that I have.
Yeah, so you noticed that with the notification plan proposed change, before it was kind of related to them kind of actively saying, okay, you need to, define this leak at 50,000 ppm. But with the proposed change, we're tying that to the monitors that are supposedly being implemented as part of this court case conclusion. So for there, what we've asked for is that 10 ppm. It's a 20-minute averaging time. So in theory, once that 20-minute averaging time, it rolls over. If it triggers, there should be probably a much more immediate release of information than you experienced this last time. I mean, that would be the expectation.
You talk about referencing the annual average of 2 to 3 or 2.3 ppm. That number is derived nationally in the air quality in major cities, air quality next to gas field. Can you kind of share a little bit where that number comes from?
Right, so that's a background level of the Northern Hemisphere. I mean, there's a lot of measurements that are taken from a lot of university groups that publish this information. There's tracking, of course, for looking at climate change impacts. So there's a lot of measurements that are conducted by NOAA